here at Memorial University. The thing that brings a smile to my face is that he is also a MUN alumnus. Dr. Ogunyemi is also an award-winning writer in the areas of diversity and inclusion, medical humanities, and medical education. He has published in many mainstream media outlets and peer-reviewed scientific journals and serves as a reviewer for JCMS and CMAJ. It's an honor to be interviewing you today.
Great. Thanks so much. Thanks for the kind introduction.
Of course. So to begin with, I would like to enter a little bit into your past. How did your childhood frame who you came to be today?
Childhood. So I think in childhood, values of hard work and sacrifice were something that my parents really instilled in me and my brother and sister from a very young age. My parents immigrated from Nigeria in the very early 1990s. So, from example, the importance of hard work, sacrifice, and dedication were things that not only would they tell me, but they showed by their example. So it's taught to value education as well, to respect others, and to appreciate diversity among many different people. So I've worked hard from childhood, and I continue working hard to contribute to this country, to this province, and this university that has given so much to me.
Wow. Yeah. So where are you from originally?
Originally from Nigeria.
Nigeria.
Yeah, Lagos, Nigeria. But yeah, I've been here since I was about 3 or 4 years old. So
Nice. Nice. That's really nice. So as a child, what did you want to be when you grew up?
growing up, I didn't actually want to be a doctor when I was quite young. I considered doing things like politics or even journalism before I thought about doing medicine. And it's because I always liked working with people, interacting with people, and helping people and learning their stories. I think politicians can have important roles in improving people's lives through policy. And journalism, I think, is a field, in some ways it's under threat, but they're important in bringing out the truth and really seeking the truth and sharing it with others. Although I do think in medicine, I've been able to combine the different things that I want in a career in terms of interacting with folks, interact with patients regularly. In fact, as you can see, I'm currently in my clinic. I just finished
Yeah.
seeing patients maybe 15 minutes ago. See patients from all walks of life and learn their stories and also help them. But besides seeing patients one-on-one, I participate in lobbying, so lobbied the provincial and federal government to increase resources for training physicians in rural parts of the province and of the country. I've been fortunate to be published in research, as you mentioned in the kind introduction, and participate in leadership activity and advocacy. So besides helping the patients that I see day to day, it can help patients on a broader level as well.
Yeah. So when you were a child, like say for example, when you were in your high school, did you have any sort of a vision in which stream you want to pursue? You said something about journalism. So was that your main drive, or did you have it clear in your head that this is where you're going to move forward in?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's hard. I think even if you asked kind of 2 years ago what I'd be doing right now, it wouldn't be, I wouldn't predict that I'd be fortunate to be talking about leadership and taking on leadership roles. In high school, I wanted to be a doctor. In fact, we may get into it later, but a lot of uh, leadership and a lot of leadership positions just come up and you have to take opportunities, but at the same time a lot of leadership is planning ahead. They say you have opportunities when planning meets good luck, right? So when I was in high school, I took a lot of science math courses because I knew I wanted to do kind of lots of science and math in university to prepare for medical school.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think when I graduated high school, uh, we had to write our ambition in the high school yearbook, and mine was to be a doctor, which worked out well. So
That's
yeah, I think by high school it kind of changed my mind. I thought there was lots of benefits. I loved science and medicine, and I knew I could interact with lots of folks. So by then I knew what I wanted to do.
wow. That's really inspirational. I also had the opportunity to look at your video on TEDx, so that was
Mm-hmm.
really interesting. Your
Oh,
whole
thanks.
speech, yeah.
Thanks for watching. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good. The YouTube channel out there has over 25 million subscribers, so had a really big exposure.
Mm-hmm.
So, what are the important points in your leadership journey?
That's a great question. So I think, yeah, I've always been one to think, why not me in terms of taking on leadership roles. I mean, probably the very first that I can think of in grade four, we had it was called Student Voice. So it was kind of a student council, and I ran, and I was successful. I had my brother was my campaign manager, so that was the very first time I had we'll say an official kind of leadership position. Here, when I completed medical school at Memorial, I was a president of the Medical Student Society. And
Wow.
here I thought, I had a great working relationship with then Dean James Rourke and then Vice Dean Dr. Sharon Peters. So I learned a lot about collaboration, representing the students, but also working with the very senior administration. I did work with student leaders from all years of medicine. The medical school was in the media, so I managed media interviews with CBC. We managed the finances of our modest association. We actually had a surplus, and I actually gained many leadership skills and many memories during the role as Medical Student Society president. And importantly, I was tapped to kind of run the accreditation from the student point of view. So this was a 3-year um, commitment when I was in medical school, and we did have successfully got our accreditation when I
Yeah.
graduated. So I was happy to be able to deliver that. I was back in 2013 when I finished. More recently, I was selected as a convocation speaker for the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons, and it was great to represent Memorial as the only
Wow.
Memorial graduate to serve in that role. Um, and finally, I was honored to be a keynote speaker. So here at Memorial, we had the Superpowers Conference early this year in January. January seems like so long ago, right? Pre-COVID, but January this year, I was fortunate to be the keynote speaker at the Superpowers Leadership Conference here. So that was important because besides, the role as leader, it was nice to share some thoughts about leadership as well. So those are some important points that come to mind. And as you can see, many of them reflect Memorial University in one way or another.
Yeah, of course. So, what is the most difficult decision you have had to make recently, and why?
Hmm. That's a tough one in general. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. I think certainly lots of decisions personally and professionally with kind of COVID going on and the clinic. So I can't think of one particular difficult decision, but certainly lots of decisions as we're adjusting to, we want to, uh, in terms of, patients coming in and patient exposure, we want to be safe. So we only see patients that need to be seen in person. And other patients, we can actually do virtual care via phone, email, computer, some other apps. So I think that's actually a number of little decisions. So every
Yeah,
time you're assessing a patient, you need to assess the need to see them in person, and then the need, just more contacts. And technically, there's nowhere that's as safe as being at home, right? So that's something that we have to weigh. This time last year, that wasn't a decision that you had to weigh really. And other factors, whether you see them in hospital or see them in clinic, and what's the most appropriate. So I think weighing patient care, patient satisfaction, the need to see them in person are lots of different decisions that myself and many other healthcare workers are making now, and we will be making for some time in this COVID era.
yeah, yeah. So this regarding the COVID, I also had a question. It's obviously impacted the way you're seeing clients. You're seeing patients now. So how are you coping with this whole new adjustment? And this new adjustment is going to be there for a while. So how are you coping for this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm doing okay. In dermatology, we are, seeing many patients and helping out, but we're not on, the true front line like the nurses, respiratory therapists, emergency medicine doctors, many of the, family doctors, surgeons, cleaning staff, what have you. Um, so very, kind of fortunate in terms of safety point of view from that perspective. So I think the main thing is just everyone has to be flexible, right? So combination of you might see a few patients in person, you might do a few on the phone, you might do a few, they emailed a picture and this and that. There's many different apps, FaceTime, etc. So it's just being flexible with care, realizing that everyone's kind of, well, not kind of, everyone is exactly in the same boat. So
Yeah.
I'm kind of coping. Importantly, my family is in my bubble, my daughter and my wife, and now that we expanded to two bubbles, my parents as well. So very fortunate that everyone is healthy and still interacting there.
Yeah.
But just a lot of things just have to take sacrifices. So normally we visit my in-laws, but not a lot of, we haven't been doing any traveling. There's no travel planned. Um, Social life is a lot, diminished. So just really focusing on, providing good care to patients and of course, spending time with, very close family. So things are different, but those are really, we still have the most important things, right? Health and family and chance to contribute to society. So coping pretty well overall. Definitely, I'm very fortunate, I think.
Yeah, definitely. It's really nice, in this whole COVID-19 thing, how doctors, nurses are coming in the front and working for the society.
Hmm.
So, who is your leadership role model? So, who would you say would be your role model and why?
Hmm. Um, I say my parents are my role models in leadership in other ways. So, I think being a good leader involves taking risk as well as hard work, dedication, and taking and showing initiative. Both my parents showed these in spades when they moved from the home country of Nigeria to leave to North America to seek a better life for their children and their children's children. Um, and my mom's a serial entrepreneur, so certainly has taken risks and has started many successful businesses here in St. John's, and employed many Canadians, Newfoundlanders, and Labradorians. And my father is a professor of neurology at the medical school here at Memorial. So I think they've shown a lot of leadership skills. And they're both working. They continue to show leadership skills. So they're my two leadership role models.
Wow. So, your father was also in the academic field?
Yes, yeah, he's a neurologist. He's a professor of neurology here at the university. So
Uh,
he teaches and sees patients and researches and all that. So
Wow.
he taught me in med school actually, which is interesting.
Yeah, that's so nice. So
Yeah.
how and where do you find your inspiration to do your work?
Um, hmm, that's a good question. I think, I mean, there's lots of sources of inspiration kind of all around us. I think there's a lot of, we'll say everyday heroes or people just working hard, not, just working hard day to day, not getting a lot of praise. So I think there's a lot of people doing good work, and it is really kind of refreshing to do that. Um, I think that I just like to leave places, whether it's school or work or a society community, better than when I first came. So I think that's kind of a theme that I have going forward, and it's just seeing people, both those that we talk about and have platforms such as this, and a lot of people
Yeah,
that don't get praise or platform or formal introduction that are still doing good work. Right, you're going to the I think the pandemic has shined light on things, right? You go to the grocery store, like what would you do without those people working there? What would you do without the farms? What would you do without the transport folks, right? So you kind of really learn who's important that we don't necessarily think of as being, crucial people. I think in a lot of times. So those are people that I think motivate me to keep on, just like they're keep on working, just to keep on doing what I need to do, both at work and at home.
yeah. Okay. So we have a question from one of the viewers here. As an
Great.
undergraduate student who wants to become a physician one day, I would want to ask you, how do you deal with fear? Did you pass your courses so smoothly because you genuinely liked your courses and study material, and that's why you passed, or was it something else?
Okay, good question. So lots to unpack. So I did my undergrad at Western University of Western Ontario. Um, Not that it really, I don't think it really matters in terms of answering the question. I think that everyone every program, whether it's undergrad or med school, there's always some difficult times, right? Challenging exams. You're not going to do as well as you think you can do, all the time. So I think it's just seeing any either failure or um, any shortcoming as really an opportunity for improvement in the future, right? So I think you don't want to see failure as an end and
Yeah,
have a fixed mindset, but you want to see failure or not doing well as an opportunity for growth. And that's similar with fear. If you're afraid of not doing poorly, or you did poorly, or this opportunity is going to take too much time. I think just try to reframe some of these issues and see it as an opportunity for growth rather than an opportunity for not kind of perfecting it or not getting it right. But I did a double major in medical sciences and sociology, so I'd enjoyed both. I thought that when I get tired of writing lab reports and doing experiments in physics classes, then I would study about the sociology of medicine, or sociology of whatever it was, health, advertising, lots of different types of sociology. So it was a good balance to have those two. So I thought that medicine is an art and a science, so it's important that I reflected both arts and science in my undergraduate career.
yeah, yeah. So we have another question here. That was thank you for answering that. We have another question from one of the viewers here. With regards to leadership, how do you get on top? Is it by showing people your ability to lead, that is being persuasive and good communication skills, or is it because you face rivalries?
Mm-hmm. Oh, rivalries. I gather. I don't know if the person means in terms of like running for a formal position then, or because I think there's many different ways to have leadership. So some appointed roles, elected roles, and some aren't formal titles or roles at all, right? So I mean, many times people lead in unofficial capacities. Um, I think in terms of I mean, a lot of leadership is kind of a couple of things. So communication, I think, is key, and communicating your vision to whoever is in charge of choosing leaders, whether it's getting appointed or sometimes it's your peers that'll select. So it's just kind of really finding out what you want to do, what you want to change, how you want to see the organization, and whether it's a 1 year term, 3 year term, 5 month term, 5 year term, and so really finding out what it is you want to do and change, getting that vision, and really communicating that vision. So I think those would be important things in leadership. I mean, it's I guess communicating, being persuasive, would also be useful, especially if you're trying to get stakeholders on board, right? Because a lot of leadership is collaboration
Yeah,
and forming coalitions. So it is important to be persuasive to just kind of sell your vision in some ways and get folks on board. So those are some skills that are important in leadership.
yeah, definitely. So this is the question I have for you.
Hmm.
Your communication skill is obviously so good. So how did you develop it? Like for me, I have done fundraising. I've done door-to-door fundraising for quite some time. So that's how
Hmm.
I've got fluent and I've got comfortable
Hmm.
with speaking to people. So how did
Hmm.
you overcome? I mean, if it may not be that you ever had, but if you had, how did you overcome the complexity of speaking to new people or just starting up a conversation?
That's a great question, and I like how you said skill of communication. I think the biggest misconception that folks have is that everyone that they see that's a good speaker is naturally eloquent and comfortable speaking,
No.
and that they don't have that trait or that gene. When really it's important to see speaking. As a skill that can be acquired, right? So it's a skill that anyone can acquire when you work on it and practice. So personally, if we start with written communication, I um, so in undergrad I started as I wanted to do medical sciences, and I didn't have a lot of room for arts, writing, humanities, etc. But as I went through my, and this is, well, I know you mentioned my TEDx talk, but as I kind of went through my degree, I thought that besides, learning how to deal with numbers and chemical reactions, it's important to communicate, and written communication was very important. So it was a skill that I worked on very hard from the last half of my undergraduate degree, so much that I did a major in sociology. During medical school, I had to craft it because there's not a lot of room for, writing, and so I did some extracurriculars in the medical humanities and did a lot of writing. I did a lot of presentations to work on oral presentations. And then I started writing for newspapers and media when I was in my residency. So I, just seeking opportunities, and again, seeing every opportunity as a chance to improve writing and communication, right? So even right now, I'm still constantly improving, communicating, improving writing, whether it's oral or written or other types of communication. So I think the most important thing is just to see it as a skill rather than a trait, right?
Yeah.
A trait, you either have it or you don't. For example, my hair is black and curly, so that's a trait that it's in my DNA, and it won't change until my hair turns white when I get older. Versus communication is the opposite, right? It's a skill that can change and it can improve steadily, but you just have to go out of your way to find experiences to do it, and to improve, and to just keep on working on your craft, right? It's just like if you play basketball, you play golf, right? You go, you practice, you keep on working, and you're a little bit better than you were yesterday. So that's the only important thing, that you get a little bit better than you were yesterday, but not as good as you will be tomorrow.
Yeah, definitely. That's very well said. Also, I remember Will Smith, in which he says in one of his motivational speeches, talent is something that you have naturally by birth, but skill is something that is only developed with hours and hours of beating on your craft.
That's
So,
right.
it's really nice that skill can actually be polished and be brought up in an individual, whereas
Hmm.
talent is something that's just there from birth, right?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. I think, yeah, well, he's one of the best in terms of, I think, very, very, he's a household name, popular people that talk a lot about work ethic and skill. The late Kobe Bryant also has a lot of, content out there. Um, I think from, so that's important, just, people that we kind of know from, kind of, we're talking at a university function. So, at an academic point of view, Carol Dweck is a Stanford psychologist, and she's done a lot of work in growth mindset, and that's a very important concept to have. As well as there's a psychologist at Penn who talks a lot about grit. So those are just in terms of resources. I don't know if folks are looking for resources. Those are some things to look into. So Carol Dweck is just briefly, a growth mindset has that failure is not the end; it's a springboard for growth. That even as adults, right, we have the a near infinite capacity to grow and improve day to day, and intelligence and creativity and leadership are not, as you mentioned, not traits or natural talents, but there are skills that can be honed.
Yeah, definitely. So we have another question from a viewer here.
Right.
He's asking, can social media boost your communication skills? Can it help improve your communication skills? What do you think?
That's a great question. I've actually thought about that periodically over the last little while. So I've for me, I use Twitter the most, and so right now they have 280 character limit. It used to be 140.
Yeah,
It's interesting because if you're on social media and you're trying to connect with folks in the world, um, you have to be concise. You have to, with the character limit, you have to get what you want out, make it clear to a general, it's a worldwide general audience, but concise enough. So I think it's actually useful that way. So similar with writing, when I began kind of writing in, my first degree, um, a little bit wordy and a little bit rambling. So I really kind of tighten things up. And every time I submit for a news newspaper or other kind of publication, they'll make edits and revisions. So for me, I always look at those. So I look at the final product that they publish and compared to what I submit. and then that shows you what what they fix, and a lot of it is just shortening things and tightening it. So I think social media can be interesting in a way in terms of tightening your communication.
Yeah.
And another idea is just we're all biased and see the world from our point of view and our perspectives, but when you put something out there, then other people, again, when they see your content, their impression is clouded by their perspectives and
Yeah.
their points of view and their biases. So you can learn from people's reactions to what you post. It helps you kind of reflect a little bit. So those are two useful kind of things you can get from social media.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great point. So another question is, we have here, I want to ask about human anatomy. I find it really easy to see drawings of textbook images of cell structures, lung structures, etc. However, I am really afraid I might faint looking at an actual human dissection, and I'm
Mhm.
scared of cutting and looking at blood. So how do you overcome this medical shock?
That's it. Yeah, that one's an interesting question. It's true that it's not the same because yeah, you mentioned or the person mentioned looking at it in real life is different, and when when you see that this is a real it's a real human that lives that we're grateful that they donated their body to science. But it's not just looking at it, feeling it and actually smelling it, right? So there's
I cannot
formalin is used
imagine.
to formalin is used to preserve the bodies, but it's not for the most fainted heart. I think one of my cousins, in Nigeria, she um, there's some doctors in the family, but she was less keen to do it just because the first time they're in the cadaver land, they're like, nope, I'm out. I do think that many people, I can't say most, but certainly many people can get used to it. The human body desensitizes. That's a crucial adaptation, right? The human body desensitizes. It's similar to, just to make things a bit lighter. You may have seen the commercial. I don't know if it's Bounty or what. They talk about being nose blind, right? So if your house is a bit smelly, you won't notice it when you're there. But if you leave and come back in 2 hours, you'll be like, "Oh my god, I can't believe I lived in this for the last couple of days." So it's similar with a lot of reactions. I think most people can get desensitized to a noxious stimuli. So I wouldn't rule things out based on that, but it is something to consider, right? I mean, there's going to be blood and guts and some of the some of those. That's all part of being a doctor, right?
Yeah. So another question is, what keeps you motivated to build a hopeful future in this province, and when you could be anywhere in the world?
hmm That's a great question. I mean, the main thing is, like everyone, for me, the province is home. This is really the only home that I remember. Um, and yeah, I mean, all my childhood memories are here in St. John's. I grew up in the West End, and family friends are here. So for me, I wouldn't live anywhere else. In terms of hope is important. I think hope is important all around the world these days. I would say particularly in Newfoundland and Labrador. With our fiscal situation and some other challenges that we're facing, even on top of the rest of, say, the country. Um, so it is important to keep hope. I think that Newfoundlanders and Labradors are a very hardy bunch. So I have no doubt that we can, this too shall pass, and we shall kind of overcome some of the challenges, whether it be COVID, financial, um, etc. Um, so I think it's important to keep a positive perspective and just leverage some of the benefits that we have.
Yeah, yeah. Did you ever think of moving out somewhere else? Maybe during your after your medical degree? Did you ever think of going
Yeah,
outside?
the only time I lived outside of Newfoundland was for training. So I did a
Oh,
four-year degree at Western, just because they didn't have that particular program here at Memorial. I came back here for medical school and did some graduate school, and then I did my dermatology training at UBC.
mm-hmm.
I always wanted to come back here, but I knew that we don't have a dermatology training program here in Newfoundland. So I went to Vancouver for 5 years and came back a couple of years ago. I mean, it's up to me. I would live here, forever, die probably in St. John's. Um, certainly there's other opportunities. I think that some, opportunities and gaining expertise are best abroad, but for me, the whole goal, just like I went to Vancouver for 5 years to train, was to bring that skill back, right, to help people in my home
Yeah,
province. So depending if I have other interests outside of medicine, things like leadership and helping out the community. So if there are opportunities to develop skills and just different perspectives that I can bring to improve the lot of of folks here in Newfoundland Labrador, then that would be that would be an opportunity to go away to learn in order to kind of bring that back here.
yeah, yeah. So this is a question I've had personally. I've always wanted to ask a medical student. I don't have many friends in the medical department, but now that I have you, I'd like to ask you.
Sure, all ears.
So, when you were in your medical school or when you were preparing for it, I'm sure there must be very little time for you to do other activities like, social gatherings or doing entertainment. You must have very little time for that. So, how did you manage that? How did you do your time management? How did you equally divide your time with everything that you're supposed to do with all your responsibilities?
Yeah, that's a great question. And yeah, it's funny looking back. So now I'm a father. I have a 10-month-old at home, and that's being a parent is a lot, especially to young children, is a lot busier than being a student in my personal experience. Um,
Yeah,
so that's the first thing. Um, yeah, time management is very important. I think a lot of it is just knowing the difference between things that are some things are important and not urgent. Some things are urgent and not important, and just sorting that out, right? So typically, um, yeah, we would do courses and study, and after an exam, you don't really feel like studying because you just kind of you may have crammed for it. Then I'll spend time doing some other extracurricular activities. And in a way, I saw them as kind of a break from besides studying medicine, it's important to talk about things like lobbying the government or working on policy, educational policy, and then involvement with the medical student society, et cetera. So I kind of saw it as a little bit of a break from studies. So that was important. Definitely lots of time management. I had a calendar of kind of things to do, things that had to be done today, things that can wait a week, things to do only if you have extra time, et cetera. So it's just kind of setting priorities, putting things in categories of urgence and importance, and and just finding the time and trying to be efficient as much as you can as well.
yeah. So basically, to do medicine, you have to be very much in your time management skill. You have to be in the top of your time and be counting every second.
Well, maybe not every second, but again, see, you use the word again, skill, right? Time
Yeah,
management skill. So you kind of you kind of learn as you go. Yeah, you kind of learn as you go, kind of how much attention things need to do, and multitasking, etc. So again, I think just as well anyone can do it. It just takes a bit of it just takes a bit of getting used to.
that's nice. Yeah. So another question that we have from one of the viewers is, tell us of a book that you thought was really helpful to you.
Helpful. A couple of books. I suppose in terms of being helpful, I read a book by Adam Grant, Originals, that was interesting. It talks about leaders and being original and some of the skills that they had and how opportunity played a role and some of the different ways of thinking. So I thought that was very important in terms of leadership. It has some good, important case studies and was very easy to read. So I thought that was very helpful. Um, I think in terms of being impactful, probably the most impactful book I've read is called Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. It's a Nigerian author. So that one is fiction. It talks about colonialism in Nigeria and the experience that contact with the Western world had on Nigeria and the folks there. So that was important because I think it's important to have a look at well, I mean, history and the role that our history, collective history, has in shaping where we are today. So that was a more impactful book. But I thought that Originals by Adam Grant was also a very useful and interesting read.
Yeah, yeah. I have a book here that I really enjoy. I finished it like three times already. This book is by Dale Carnegie.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
How to Win Friends and Influence People. So this is one really really nice book to actually
Yeah,
build your skills.
that one is that one's a very, very popular book. That one must have been selling millions of copies, right? Yeah,
It's
yeah.
80
I mean,
years in
I've heard
print.
of that. Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean that's not surprising. It's it's one of those like the art of the deal. It's like the art of the deal. It's like a book that kind of everyone knows. I haven't personally read it. I really I really should. But yeah, thanks for sharing that one.
of course. So this is another question is on leadership. Do you
Mhm.
have a mentor, and how have they influenced you?
Yeah, so that's actually a very great point. I've had a lot of mentors, and it's one of those things where when you're kind of in it and going through training, et cetera, you don't really realize it until you reflect after. I was very fortunate, and there so and mainly at Memorial. So in fact, I'll kind of go through it a little bit to put some context. I think a lot of folks don't. Realize that you can have different mentors for different areas and different goal, if you will. So when I was at Memorial, I had my clinical mentor, so I wanted to be a dermatologist. Dr. Ian Landell is a dermatologist that I worked with in medical school. And actually worked with him in the same clinic as a staff physician, which is a kind of nice full circle. So it was like kind of clinical mentorship in dermatology. But besides that, I spent a lot of time in leadership. So Dr. Sharon Peters was then the vice dean of faculty of medicine, and lots of time in accreditation. It was 3 full years. She was managing it overall. I was managing the student aspect of accreditation. So there's lots of tasks and meetings and documents and reviews and this and that and teleconference, etc. So she was my mentor in leadership. I talk about my mentor in clinical medicine. I had a strong interest in medical humanities, and doctors Jim Connor and Jennifer Connor, who were my mentors in that. We did a lot of projects, and they supported me in a lot of projects in medical humanities for 3 years during my uh, during medical school. And also had a research mentor. So I did a lot of research with Majid Qureshi, who's a rheumatologist, just finishing up his career, as well as Jerry Mugford, who's an epidemiologist. So it was actually nice. I had kind of a pool of mentors. So my interests in clinical care, research, leadership, administration, and writing and medical humanities were all kind of I guess blossoming, if you will, because I had people that were willing to take their time out to mentor me.
Yeah, yeah, that's nice. So another question is, I think I already sort of asked this question, but how do you manage work life and school work together? So when you were a student, how did you balance your school work and your off-campus work together?
Mm-hmm. It's tough. I mean, there's no kind of magical formula. So it's pretty typical. I think I found with some medical schools when I went through, certainly with undergrad, things kind of ebb and flow. I think in exam month or 3 weeks of final exams, like you're not. For me, typically didn't spend a lot of time doing extracurricular activities. I was, studying exams and, preparing as much as possible. But outside of those times, then you can spend time doing extracurriculars. And there's, a couple of tips. I think we kind of made it fun. So in my first year, I lived in residence at Western.
Yeah,
My second year, I was an orientation leader. And it just so happens that the group of us, almost a dozen of us, a lot of us were really good friends. So for me, it was kind of a social thing, as well as, we were leaders and having extracurricular activities. So we kind of put them together. I think that was useful. Um, and the other thing to consider, I've heard the phrase that you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So just surrounding yourself with good people, I think in general, is very useful. And as it relates to balancing, we'll say, school and extracurriculars, a lot of the extracurriculars that I did and the folks that I spent time with doing those extracurriculars were also kind of some, either they're pre-med students or they're either way they were very kind of dedicated. So we had a similar schedule where we would, work very hard when it's exam time and then
Yes.
explore some other ways that we can contribute to the community outside of that. So things like, scheduling, we talked about time management, important versus urgent versus both are some tips as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So, as a leader, how do you deal with conflict within your team in a way that respects all sides? So, as a medical doctor, so as a leader and a medical doctor, you must have encountered situations where you have to deal with conflict. So, how would you go about dealing with that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, so I served as a chief resident in dermatology at the University of British Columbia during my training. So there was, there was a little bit of conflict because I was representing the other residents, so those trainees, while discussing in a room mainly full of, full, completed dermatologists. Um, so I think it's important to see everyone's perspective. I think everyone has their own point of view. It's important to try to see your blind spots or your biases as well, and try to reflect those in your answers. And sometimes, I think compromise, the principle of compromise is important, but it doesn't mean that you're always 50-50 on everything. Sometimes compromise means that, you have your way now and this person has
Yeah,
their way later.
of
So
course.
I think you want to kind of broaden the concept of compromise. Um, and so I think that's important. And then just staying true to kind of, key values. So, fairness, respect, justice. So those should be kind of the overarching values in sorting things out. And you can keep on other just I guess little tips. So you can reassess problems, and sometimes it's just taking the humility to ask. Right? Sometimes assumptions are being made, so just asking instead of just keep everything on the table and fully go into things with a full open mind rather than tunnel vision. So those I think are some things to keep in mind in the conflict resolution process.
Yeah, yeah. So, what is the best piece of advice that someone's given to you, and what advice would you give to new students go entering medical field?
Mm-hmm. Um, I think best piece of advice. So my father used to, well, he still does, but he used to always say, "What you're doing today will affect where you are in 10 years from now." So for me, that really speaks to the idea of vision and to the idea of grit. So grit is just working hard for a long period of time, right? So grit is not studying for an exam or studying for two exams or studying for exams during an entire term, right? Grit is working hard towards goals for the very, very long term. So for me, my path into medicine started when I was in high school, maybe even before in some ways. Um, so that is, I think it's useful. So just where you are now, it will play a role in where you are in 10 years. Um, so you said other piece of advice to give to folks. I think
Yes.
it's important to go out of your way to seek different experiences and to seek folks that are, unlike you in some way. Uh, Sometimes we're more comfortable or we naturally um, are inclined to interact or strike up conversation with people that are similar to us because we talk about what we have in common. But really, often you have the most to benefit from someone who is dissimilar, right? Someone who's different from you. But that's not necessarily a natural or sometimes not the most comfortable thing to do. But I think that many benefits can come from this, and there are many kind of historical examples and of this. So if you're very science inclined, why not take a philosophy course, an arts course? Or for me, I started by taking one sociology course, then I switched from as a biochem major to a major in sociology. I also did the medical sciences major, but sometimes it just takes just that little, just to just get your foot in the door and
Yeah.
just look for an experience or people that are different, and you never know, what's going to be on the other side.
Yeah. Definitely. So another question is, as a medical doctor, you must encounter many stressful situations. So how do you unwind or cope with this stress?
I think main thing is really just for me, just going home to my family. When I was in medical school, it was my parents, and now it's my wife and my daughter. Just at the end of the day, kind of unwind, whether it's a good day or a bad day. That they'll always be there. So uh, that's really the main thing for me. Sometimes running some things. Um, by those that care about you can be useful in terms of unwinding. So it is important that, as much as we talk about hard work and achievement and vision and dedication and working hard, people need balance. You can't be on all the time because we're not robots, right? So we have
Yeah,
needs, emotional needs, etc. So it is important from time to time to unwind and to reflect, right, and to re-energize.
yeah, definitely. So this is probably the last question from my side. How can your story inspire students to launch forth on their own leadership journey?
Okay. I think that it's important again, so seeking unique perspectives is probably one of the most important things that I've kind of learned just by practice. I kind of stumbled upon, but I think that now y'all know at this point in your education and leadership journeys. So I really do think that you need the humility to realize that we're all colored by our experiences, right? And that our viewpoints are limited. So you need to go out every way to seek folks with different viewpoints. This is important in success and creativity.
Yeah,
And one example that I like to I'll leave you with is so the edge effect is a phenomenon that gets its name because it's at the intersection of two distinct ecosystems, like the grassland and the boreal forest, that the greatest number of unique organisms that can be found. So when we're thinking about creative way to solve problems, then it's often when you come at it from two different perspectives or two people with different lived experiences come together that we can solve problems. So I think that's important, so it speaks to kind of going out of your way to seek that the conflux of experiences and intellect, having humility to realize that leadership, we can't do it on our own, right? It's important to have a group and form coalitions.
yeah,
And I think those would be the most important points I'd like to leave with y'all.
yeah. Thank you for that. I'm made aware that you have also a few slides you would like to share.
I can, yeah. I didn't know whether I had time, so I can get that going.
Yeah,
Just bear with me.
yeah, definitely. That'd be awesome.
Um, and then I think I have to share. So I'm the presenter.
You are. So there should be a button down
Share
below that
content.
says
Okay, okay. I think I got it. Okay, you guys can see my PowerPoint screen.
Yep.
Okay. Enter full screen. Oh no, that's not full screen. View.
I think if you press F5, it should go into full screen.
Yeah, slide. Uh, slide sorter. F5. Oh,
Five.
I'm on a Mac.
Oh,
So I think slideshow play from start. Okay,
oh, there you go. Yeah.
you guys got it great. Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about leadership in today's world. You guys can cut me off. It's getting close to 4. And I've actually talked about a lot of these already, which is neat. Growth mindset, leadership as a process, the edge effect I just mentioned, the importance of reflection and feedback. So we spend a lot of time in the comfort zone, but it's important to be in the learning zone, which can also be called the growth zone. That's when we learn the
Yeah.
most. So that's when we challenge ourselves to experiences that are a little bit harder than our routine tasks that we do day to day. So the growth mindset was conceptualized by Carol Dweck, who's a Stanford-based psychologist. So we talked a lot about it. So the growth mindset focused on skills versus talent. It holds that character and creativity can be malleable, so they're not static. We have an infinitely large capacity to learn, and failure is really a springboard for success. Failure is not the end. So leaders are made rather than being born. So for those that are numerically inclined, right? So if you're doing the same thing for a full year, after the year, you'll be exactly where you are. But even if you increased a little bit, right, 1.01, there's a considerable difference at the end of the year. So that's just a numerical way to phrase what we've kind of been saying. And I like this, these words from composer and pianist Duke Ellington, right? Favorite song in his repertoire is always the next one. So for leadership, one size does not fit all, right? There's many ways that leadership can look like. Leadership is about perspective. So it's about seeing something familiar with a fresh perspective. So vujade is kind of the opposite of déjà vu, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. René Laennec was a French flute player turned into a doctor, and he actually discovered the stethoscope. So on the bottom right is a modern stethoscope, but on the top right is the first prototype of a stethoscope, which looks a whole lot like a flute. It's because he took principles of sound amplification as a flutist and translated them into making the modern stethoscope. So it's only because he had the experience in music and in medicine that he was important to. He was able to make this symbol that's it's a true symbol of medicine, right? The stethoscope. Another example, so pointillism is an art form. You see the picture on the left, but we applied it to make tests for color blindness. So all these individual dots can be applied in the health field for color blindness tests. And it's also applied in tech, right? So the pixelation on your phone is also made of tiny little points, and this concept came from the art form. So if you kind of think laterally, then a lot of experiences and skills can be used to have creativity and success in different ways. I'll skip a few slides. I know we don't have a whole lot of time left. Okay, so confirmation bias. So again, about humility. So confirmation bias is when you only see the subset of facts out there that agree with what you already think. So it's important to seek all the facts out there, and in fact, to investigate, opinions that may not be exactly as you have them, and avoid confirmation bias and living inside your own bubble. So in this way, bubble is a bad thing, but when it comes to fighting COVID, bubbles is a good thing. This is just the definition of confirmation bias. That's something to avoid. So I thought this was interesting. Liz Winstead is a co-creator of The Daily Show, right, with Trevor Noah. So one way that he's kind of modernizing the way to use social media, which I think you mentioned earlier on, she'll post a joke just to see if it sticks or not. Over 25 retweets in 1 minute, then that means, that meets the bar and the joke stays and it goes on to the next level, and then it might be used on The Daily Show with Trevor Noah. So I thought that was kind of a neat way, because really it's an efficient way to get feedback, it's an economical way to get feedback, and it's a functional way to get feedback, right? It reflects a diverse audience on her social media. So it's important to kind of think outside the box in terms of getting things done. So we talked a little about mentorship. So mentorship and sponsorship are things that I'll talk about next. So mentors can be at any level. They usually provide guidance, strategies, and feedback, and help you to navigate kind of the hidden curriculum or hidden agenda. They can increase your confidence. Sponsorship is something that's not talked about as often. So sponsors are often senior because they're in a position to publicly endorse you and help you connect with career opportunities and to advocate for your advancement. So it's important to have mentors and sponsors as well. And they can kind of help you to get to where you need to go. So mentorship, in a way, it's like watering the plant, whereas a sponsor, right? Sponsorship, just like Will and Jada here, someone that'll really endorse you publicly and help you to maybe make that connection or get that presentation, or give you that research opportunity, etc. So last few slides now, in terms of not feeling quite ready to lead in leadership. Well, you wouldn't be alone. To lots of very, very historical figures had similar reservations about starting leadership. I think someone mentioned fear earlier, right? So you can read this quote by George Washington: "I use every endeavor in my power to avoid it." Steve Wozniak, the co-founder of Apple, said, "My psychological block was that I didn't want to start a company because I was afraid." So fear would be very common. As well, Martin Luther King said, "It happened so quickly that I didn't have time to think. It's probable that if I did, I'd have declined." and that was Martin Luther King's thought on his first boycott. And of course, as history has unfolded, we're very glad that he did not decline. And leadership is not easy. So I was a TEDx speaker last year, and it was really just at the last minute that I decided to apply, and it worked out well. Yeah, the last hour of the last minute, and it was a great experience. And I think it's the last couple of points now. So where you don't have enough leadership credentials, or you don't fit the molds of other leaders. So this was an interesting article from Harvard Business Review. They talk about hire leaders for what they can do, not what they have done. And that's why this picture with the cat that kind of sees himself as a lion. So the secret to selecting great leaders is to predict the future, not to reward the past. So as I mentioned earlier, you want to communicate your vision for that organization in terms of how your skills and your personal experience can help them to get to where they need to go. Not that you can match up to who's fill those shoes before, but you can help the organization in the future, not about the past. So in summary, we talked a little about the growth mindset and the comfort zone, diversity and experience. I talked about the edge effect before getting into this PowerPoint. Seeking feedback is important. So mentors, sponsors are important. Leadership is a process. And I'll leave with this quote from Margaret Mead.
Yeah.
Great. Good. Well, any last questions then?
There is one question that's here twice, so I might pitch it to you if that's okay.
Sure.
People are just wondering how you found your mentors, if you actively looked for them or if you kind of just stumbled upon them.
Yeah, it's a good question. Sometimes organizations will have formal mentorship programs. For me, let's see. Yeah, I mean, a lot of it was serendipitous. A lot of it happened to be serendipitous. So, for example, well, in dermatology, that when I was interested in that field, so I did just kind of reach out to him one day, and kind of a cold call, if you will, right, if we could say, and that worked out well. And that's and a part of it. Sorry, just to segue, is that it's important to pay it forward, right? So we have to lift as we climb. So we have to help others out just as we kind of progress in our journey. So just as he mentored me when I was kind of going through the ranks, I mentor others because I know there's going to be others that are going to want to be, in the shoes that I'm in right now. So it's important to lift as we climb. So some of it was, I would say cold calling, and a lot of it was serendipitous, I think. So if you think about it, I think we all have lots of opportunities that we don't really, see as opportunities. Sometimes we'll just write it off. So I just really carefully consider all the opportunities that come your way and kind of go, and just kind of go from there. That's important. Take a little leap of faith. So not just in organizations, but also in seeking mentors. Just send the email, try to flag them down, etc. Because you never know. It's not everyone has the time or the energy to do it. But some folks might, and I think it's worth just reaching out. A lot of people are happy to help others and are actually even flattered, right, that that they think they have something to offer you. So I'd keep that in mind.
Nice.
That's excellent. Thank you so much. It is 1 minute too, so I know that you are a very busy person, so we'll end it here. We really appreciate you coming to talk to us today. Mm-hmm. We had so many fantastic points, and I'm sure everybody else here really found it helpful hearing your story and what you had to say. So we do really appreciate you coming to speak with us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It was nice. Yeah, it was nice to speak to folks, and I guess I'll leave y'all with my email if they want to contact me. I think my Twitter was on the slides as well. So if anyone has any other follow-up questions or you get some questions later, I'm happy to answer them in one form or another.
Okay. Yeah, perfect.
Great.
I'm not sure if you see the chat here. You're welcome to put it in the chat there so people could copy it off.
Okay. Sure. It's just my first initial and my last name at mun.ca. I can't see the chat. Is this going to kick us out at 4?
No.
Oh, okay. I thought it was okay. I'll have a look at it. chat.
So B and then your last name at mun.ca?
B dot.
B dot.
B dot.
B dot. Okay. So
Mun.ca.
a question, the last something on a lighter note. How do you pronounce your last name? Is it
Same.
Ogunyemi?
Ogunyemi.
Ogunyemi. Okay, I was
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. So it's B dot Ogunyemi at mun.ca. There you go. Good. Okay. So well, I'll chat in with you folks at another time, and have a great day. And like I said,
Thank you. Of
feel free to reach out.
course. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Okay. Yes. Thanks so much.
Thank
Okay.
you
See you
so
now.
much. Goodbye,
Yeah.
everybody.
Bye.